Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's Advanced Persistent Threats and Cybersecurity Group LinkedIn Live event. My name is Aaron Stillwell, Group Owner and your host. For a quick update, Giorgio could not join us today, but we have some great minds helping us discuss our today's topic, gaps in complex cybersecurity environments. I am joined by Bonnie Stith, former Senior Advisor to the Director of the CIA on Cyber Threats and Operations. Bonnie led an organization of thousands of officers and a multi-million-dollar program focused on specialized technology to accomplish the cyber threat mission. Thank you, Bonnie.
Thank you. I appreciate the invitation.
Thank you. I am also joined by Alex Mavro, Security Manager at Jetronics and a former CISO at BNP Paribas. Alex has extensive experience on IT security management and a strong focus on governance, risk management, and regulatory compliance. Thank you, Alex.
Thank you. Hello, everyone.
So, as this is a live event, we are open to questions. We'd love to see them and have you join us in the conversation. Please post your questions on LinkedIn comments, and I will make sure they get to our guests. So, everyone, thank you for joining us. So, let's start off with asking, what does a complex cybersecurity environment look like in today's enterprise world? And we'll kind of let you guys go back and forth who wants to answer. But again, we like in this group, we try to make it as organic as possible.
I guess I can take a stab at it first, and then Alex will piggyback on that, because I think, as we've discussed this, he's more in the complexity of it. I'm more in the overseeing and looking at it from a top level. But I think the word complex pretty much describes it for me, and that is in addition to what we have been using and what's still in use, what's coming into use, on cloud, on-prem, AI, a multitude of things attached to systems. I would say for good and not good reasons, let's be honest. It's hard to know what's happening. That's that complexity, right? Do you know everything that's going on at the same time? Or are you discovering things all the time? And so I hope you're discovering good things. I hope they're not bad things. But I think we're only as secure as our weakest point, and we spend a lot of time playing whack-a-mole, racing after the latest news, found vulnerability or incidents. And again, you're only as good as that last thing that you found. And so, Alex, I'll hand it to you from there.
Okay, so over there, let's not forget about diverse endpoints. Over there, we have mobile IoT or X devices. If we talk about the industrial, let's talk about something that multiple vendors and overlapping tools like EDR, SIEM, CASP, for some others who doesn't know, DLP. Then we have global operations, and over there we can have a mix with region-specific compliance needs, because America has some compliance part, and then Europe have a different type of compliance. We have GDPR over here in Europe. We have NIS2. We have HIPAA, of course, in America. And along with other different compliance part. If we speak in a nutshell, this environment often lacks centralized visibility or policy enforcement. That's the only problem that I see. And there are multiple control planes and telemetry things, sources, which is making hard to detect those threats that we see. Of course, most of the info can be orchestrated in different tools, and some others can maintain constant security.
Yeah, I think that's a big piece of it. I like where you introduced GDPR into this as well, because even in the United States, we've got different states that have got different privacy pieces in place. In addition to the different agencies that are levying different compliance pieces on. So while you might, be subject to the NIST and some of the other pieces, there's also the HIPAA piece, the Office of Civil Rights out of the Medicare area, Health and Human Services. That also has its own play. And I think, there's a lack of understanding overall about all of these different pieces, and each organization that finds something then comes out and asks questions. And so you might find yourself playing catch up a lot with the different governmental oversight that has discovered something new and is asking you questions about how are you using that and trying to apply a fairly old law or old regulation to a new capability in a way that you didn't anticipate. And so, in that respect, I would say even, if you look at the hospital systems, how are they using Meta and Google marketing? What kind of data are they storing on people that are logging into their systems and looking? There's a lot of curiosity, and does that somehow or other become a HIPAA violation? How are you using this pieces? So we're only as good as that thing we get asked a question about, today. And then we're trying to play catch up in these system environments to figure out who's using what and how it's being applied from the outside to what we're doing.
Yeah, we just had, excuse me, Bree mentioned that she said, right up my street with GDPR. Thank you for this, trying to bridge CIPR with cybersecurity.
Yeah. How many of you get frustrated every time you basically open up a website? It wants your permission to, basically use all the
to provide
store
your
this
data.
or store that. And, and what kind of user, abilities are you giving up when you say, no, you can't? So, and then what are you allowing if you say, yes, you can? I mean, I don't know about you guys, but the last time I read an end user licensing agreement was never. And so what are you allowing and what are you disallowing? That's a big question for many of us.
But some of the websites, it doesn't ask you if you want to allow or not. You click on yes or no, which is another problem over there. Okay, I'm giving my consent for what? For everything, or for some part of the info that you are looking for, like sessions, like you're tracking the cookies, or you're tracking the behavior, and so on. But nothing is clear on those kind of websites.
And there it is. So, so there's on the user end, what are you allowing? But on the organizational end, what are you allowing when somebody accesses your systems? Yeah. And so, I don't think the same kind of pop-ups are showing up around on the inside, sure. On the network side, when you see somebody coming into your systems. And so I think, as we're talking about complexity, cybersecurity, we're talking systems, we're talking people, we're talking vendors, we're talking countries.
True. Yeah.
I mean, there's so many things that have to be looked at in this space that is pretty confusing.
Yeah, true. I agree on that.
So for next question, let's talk about what are the most common gaps organizations overlook when they're designing their cybersecurity programs for very complex environments?
From my perspective, and again, Alex and I have talked about how we come at this from different perspectives. I wonder how many of these organizations have got a cyber person on their board. I mean, how are you explaining to your board what kind of risk is being taken, with whatever you're doing in your cyberspace? And so, I know in many of the companies that I talk to and work with, they do have a designated cyber person on the board, but I suspect that there's a larger number of companies that do not.
Correct.
And so, how much of the risk of what's going on does the board really understand and accept with what's going on behind the scenes with your systems? So I think that's a big piece that's overlooked. Obviously, how are you keeping your people informed of what's going on? As you build these, so-called, 100% secure, no trust, or I guess the word we used today was zero trust systems. What are your people experiencing? Because if you make it so zero trust that I can't use it, then what did you succeed with? So there's a big piece in all of this is, on the one side, we want it to be zero trust and totally secure. On the other side, it still has to transact our business.
I agree.
And so what kind of risk do we take when we move in this space? And I think there's a lot of gaps in that space, just on how are you educating the people that are going to need to use it on what you're doing and why it's important.
That's the key, in fact. Education and training, and then security awareness. This is what we need. Maybe because I have checked, I think 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, around that, there was an article on the internet, and it says, okay, how much you can train a person, or how much you can provide him a security awareness. You provide once, you provide twice, but no one I have heard to say when we can do a real scenario. So do one like that, and then you'll see what will be the impact. Of course, don't do on the production. You do on a different environment, but do it and make it like is a real scenario, and then you'll understand how the people will react if they are doing in a proper way the correct thing, if they understood their role, because they are somehow the first line of defense. If we have a look over there, and I think over there, people has to understand how should understand what they have to do over there.
Yeah, and I think the other piece of it, the common gaps. So is it a common gap or is it an uncommon gap? I mean, I think it tends to be very localized, right?
Yeah.
So if I'm in the place where I'm installing the new security update, I'm really only concerned with what I'm doing. But if I'm not looking out across the system at all of the other areas that are impacted, then, first of all, what kind of work am I creating for somebody else? What kind of capability am I removing from somebody else? And what kind of workaround are they going to have to create to get around what I'm doing that is going to create more vulnerabilities in my system? I think, a lot of times it's well-intentioned.
Correct.
But I think it's the unintended consequences of these bigger pieces that sometimes don't get appropriately incorporated. And so, we were talking earlier on today, and I said, the fact that you tell me no doesn't make my requirement go away.
Correct.
It just means I got to figure out how to do it a different way. And it might create vulnerabilities in the system because I still have to accomplish my job.
Yeah.
And so if your security makes it too hard to accomplish my job this way, if I can't do it on a work computer, I'm going to use my home computer. And if I can't use that, then I'm going to use my phone. And so what kind of risk am I bringing back to the organization when I figure out my workaround to your big solution to security at the organizational level?
If we speak about the common gaps in the internal organization, I think there are multiple. And if we take one by one, let's say asset visibility, where we have many assets like cloud resources, IoT that we have already spoken, test environments. These are untracked, to be honest. So that's a common gap. If we speak about identity access management complexity, over there we have over permission roles, and I have seen very often this in the cloud environments. Then unused credentials, for example, we have a lot in most of the companies, or misaligned access policies. This is another problem. Then monitoring blind spots. That's another thing very important, especially between cloud or on-prem and third-party systems, where we see a lot of let's say, risk that appear from the third-party vendors, which, there is a problem, and we have to think how we can fix those, how we can not have those kind of issues. Maybe the problem is from our side because we are not doing any compliance over there. We're not doing any audit over there in order to understand what is the environment, who has access to that environment, what are the roles, and so on. Then if we speak about other common gaps, shadow IT is another big problem. Where I have seen, I'm not talking in my past experience, but I have heard very often people that are manipulated that data, like people from the business intelligence or the business analyst that is taking some data, and you don't know about it, so you are not aware. No one is informing about it, how is manipulated, for what, and so on. Then you might have an incident response readiness where over there, as you have mentioned, the playbook may not cover the hybrid or cross-platform attacks, and multiple other common gaps that can persist due to rapid innovation, outpacing governance and difficulty of scaling controls across all the platforms.
Yeah, I would be interested in what the audience is seeing in this space as well.
Yeah, so I see Syed just posting login types, stale passwords, weak passwords for
Yeah, correct. Yeah, that's one of the cases.
Yes.
Yeah, he's right. I mean,
and then he posts another one here. You're right. Even legacy operating systems.
Yeah.
I agree on that.
12345. That's a great password, isn't it? So
yeah.
yeah, I mean, there's these pieces out there that are just, how do you keep this from happening? Well, you can educate, but then, what kind of testing are you doing of your systems and your people to ensure that you've got some compliance going on in these spaces? Yeah, I think that, it's like, what are the most common gaps? I mean, yes, they're all common gaps, but how do you figure out how do you tackle all of these pieces? I think everybody's got to be responsible. It's not just cybersecurity teams that are responsible for cybersecurity. You've got to involve the whole of the organization in it.
Yes.
So I think in the United States, October is like Cybersecurity Month or something. And there's many times that people will ask me to record messages or have conversations that they put out as a cybersecurity video, just talking to their workforce about, here's some things that you might want to be thinking about as you're logging into your system today, or as you're looking at your emails. I do any of you share common emails with your spouses? I do. We've got a common email, and it's not uncommon for me to say to him, hey, this is fraud. Don't answer this, just in case he's going through too fast and not paying attention. I want him to also know this is a fraudulent email. This is a phishing email. So that he's not unaware of what I might be aware of, and vice versa.
Yeah.
I think.
Have you noticed that
talk to the people that you assume know?
So I was going to ask you, do you think how important it is that this training is repetitive within these organizations? Because, if you get the training, once a year, it goes in one ear, out the other. My wife works in the federal government, and sometimes, it's people are busy, right? They're doing lots of things, and they get their training, and all of a sudden, it's in, it's out, and then they're back to their work. And is it important to get that constant, repetitive training kind of in their ear so they understand the risk from that point?
We were doing a big organizational change initiative, and we had a lot of communication going on. I mean, we had, down, up, down, crosswise. I mean, we were communicating every which way we could to help people understand what was going on. And somebody asked me, what's enough communication? And I said, I don't know. I'll let you know when we get there. Because I still had people saying to me, like, I don't understand what's going on. And it didn't matter how much we were communicating. They still didn't understand what was going on. And so the reality of it is, how much you need to like educate and push this. I don't know. I'll let you know when we get there. I don't think there's too much. And the reality of it is, I think it needs to be ongoing and constant reminders of, hey, to keep, and it's not constant alerts, because I think we get alert fatigue. You get to the point where you're like, it's one more tornado warning.
Too much. Too much.
That's exactly right. So it's just that, hey, as a reminder, somebody noticed this thing, you guys might be noticing it too.
It's like the MFA fatigue. If
that's exactly right. And so if you put a little story behind it, people are more inclined to read a salacious story than they are to just like, oh man, they're talking at me again. Help create, I think, a serial about it, as opposed to just a constant like stick beating over the head with it. And I think people will be more engaged, and they'll share with each other.
So Brandon it says here about requirements need to be implemented and enforced.
There you go, Brandon. That's exactly right.
That's exactly
Password
right.
.12345. Oh my gosh. Yes.
Yeah.
There it is.
Yep.
So if I was a social engineering, I'd be putting that one in everything first. In the Washington, D.C. area, it's Redskins, by the way. Probably Nationals now, or,
If we speak about the technical point of view, I think can be put a GPO in place on the Active Directory, and then over there we can put a strict conditions in order for the users to have a correct or a strong password, let's say like that. And of course, other mechanisms in place like MFA, because that's another important thing that we should have in place. If it can be put it TOTP, a token, for example, even for that is another good thing. And then, of course, we look for additional security mechanism that we can put like a certificate and so on. There are multiple ways.
The reality of that, though, is, Alex, each one of those things costs money.
Yeah, I agree.
In a limited, a constrained budget environment, when you're trying to figure out how do I get the most bang for my buck.
Yes.
There's any number of people that want to sell you a silver bullet. Just buy this, it will solve all of your problems.
Of course.
The reality of it is there is no silver bullet. So the question then becomes, how do you trust the people that are advising you to advise you on the right things to accomplish most of what you need to get accomplished? Because there isn't 100% in this space.
True. But again, over there, we have multiple frameworks and standards. We are talking about ISO 27001. We are talking about NIST, which is a National Institute of Standards and Technologies. So another good thing. If we speak about additional devices, we can have leverage from the CIS, Center of Internet and Security. So again, we have different things where we can have a look, we can understand, but of course the person needs to be not technical, but again has to understand even on the other side, on the strategic, because that's another good thing, and governance. So we have to point on the both sides. So we have a person from the IT perspective, as you have as we discussed today, and then we have to, in the same time, to have another person who is more strategic with a governance, risk and compliance, which he has to understand on that part, how to be applied that mechanism, how to be applied control, and then to assure those controls are in place, because that's another thing that we never check. I have seen companies where they're aware about NIST, but they're not mature. Guess what? And you have a matrix on the NIST. To identify your maturity into your organization, but guess what? They are not doing anything about this, or they are not aware that it's a matrix in regards with this, and so on.
Well, I think there's a piece of risk analysis that has to go on in this space, Alex, and that is, what's the risk we're willing to take? I mean, again, risk doesn't start at 0. Risk starts at 1.
Yeah, correct.
Because 0 risk means I don't get out of bed in the morning, because then I won't have my, my likely fatal heart attack within the first 30 minutes. So I'll just stay in bed. My mother-in-law used to wake up and just stay in bed for 30 minutes. And I tried to explain to her, it's like, actually, when you get out of bed, that is a problem. But the thing is if you don't understand risk, then you're willing to accept risk.
Correct.
I think a bigger piece of this education,
or to transfer your risk, that's another thing.
Well, I mean, you transfer your risk to somebody else. In the organizational sense, it belongs to everybody. And I think that's maybe something that is often overlooked, even on the common gap, is not helping everybody understand what is the common risk of not all being responsible and involved in this space. Because you can create cultures where people do accept that it's their responsibility, to be the watchdog on this stuff. I think a lot of times, so that's passed over to the cybersecurity team. Yeah, those guys have got it. I just do this. Those guys are responsible for this. And I, maybe more emphasis on getting people to share with you the risk that the whole of the organization takes in some way, shape, or form of education or cultural change is really important.
Yeah, but you know what's the problem over here? Because this is what I have seen, and I have spoke with different people. Most of the risks are there. And why are there? They're not monitored, and people forget about them. That's the main problem I have seen. And of course, everyone knows we have a risk analysis, we have a risk mitigation over there. We try to, let's say, to reduce the risk to acceptable to acceptable level, and then you try to, if it can be fixed, okay, entirely, or eliminated that risk, it's fine. But if not, then okay, we have to monitor it. Because even if you try to, for example, there is a risk on a server, that server has a OS which is obsolete, and you can't decommission that server because it has an application that it is needed for the company. Okay, I agree on that, but we can put it outside of the DMZ. We can put it in a separate VLAN, and we can put a lot of mechanisms to protect it. But again, these things are not monitored and not checked. They are forgotten because we have 100 things that needs to be done for the business.
Well, and the last person that was responsible for that moved on to another job. Because the reality of it is most people do not stay in the same job for very long.
Correct.
And
Yeah,
so,
you're right.
so if you're the expert today, who's going to be the expert tomorrow? So I think, when you talk about common gaps, I mean, one of the common gaps might be people moving from job to job and taking that knowledge with them, but not sharing the knowledge as they leave.
But this is why we have risk register, because in that register, you can see what type of risk are there, what type of level of risk they have, then where it's located, which is the stakeholder, and so on. So you have all this information into a risk register. But again, people
If you're
are
using
not.
one.
Yeah, of course.
If you're using one. I mean, and I would say, when's the last time, our audience looked at a risk register? Who looks at the risk register? Who's responsible? Because what I see a lot is that guy is doing it. It's not my job. Because, because I'm so overwhelmed with my job that I'm trying to keep my job done. So do I have shared risk? No, I really only understand what I'm supposed to be doing here. And I don't understand all of the other pieces. And, one of the things that we talked about is, where do most security teams underestimate the complexity of the environment? I think it's in the sense of shared responsibility.
Yeah.
If I don't feel like I'm sharing responsibility and risk with you, then what's my real responsibility here? It's just to do my job.
Yeah.
Correct.
And so I might, if I'm doing my job and I'm assuming that you've got this thing covered, and you're doing your job and you assume that I've got that thing covered, then what happens? I mean, first of all, we both assume, which is never a good place to be. But the other, concern that I have in this space is, well, we all like working remotely, because, listen, I like working from home.
Everyone likes, to be honest, but there is a risk over there.
It's actually amplifying this disconnection.
Yeah.
Because we formalized our communication. So I have to get on a Teams meeting with you, or a Zoom meeting with you, or some other kind of meeting that's scheduled to talk about something. And our schedules are overloaded already. So how much conversation are we really having about these things? And so, yeah, I see that saying, just when audit happens, all the risk registers pop up, but what risks are there is not defined. I mean, I think it's a reasonable thing to say there. You're right.
Yeah.
So you find out about the risk when it gets audited. And then everybody's running around trying to fix that. And so what are you creating when you fix that? And so without the integration piece, I think, we're all just chasing the latest thing.
So, guys, if you think about what does a complex cybersecurity environment look like in today's enterprise world?
I'll hand that to you, Alex. You're the guy that's kind of in the middle of it.
Okay, we have a complex cybersecurity environment, let's say like that. That's the idea. We have multi-cloud, you have mentioned, and now over there we have AVS, we have Azure, we have Google Workspace. In the past, it was Google Cloud Platform, if I'm not wrong. Then we have on-prem infrastructure, and over there we have legacy systems, data centers. On data centers, it's a big problem. You can have outages. You can have a problem with the personnel. Someone who's entering over there, he put a USB drive or a flash drive inside of one of the servers, and then everything gets down. We have hybrid workforce with remote access, as you mentioned earlier. This is another problem over there. Diverse endpoints that I have already mentioned, multiple vendors that I already mentioned, and then global operations. But of course, there are many others over there. So
I think you also have, cybersecurity versus CIO, right?
Yeah.
So what's the cooperation between those two? So you've got your chief technical officer, you've got your chief data officer, you've got all of these pieces playing into what kind of teamwork are they creating, or are they all separate?
No, they should.
Complex piece is it's only you create another role that adds another level of complexity to it.
Yeah.
Because you want to highlight that role.
Yeah.
And so it just continues to grow. So it's not just on the network side. You've got your hardware side, which it used to be hardware was everything, but most people have forgotten that your hardware is kind of like your first line of defense. If I get on your hardware, I can get in everything else.
Yeah.
So the piece of it is, it's like, what's the flavor of the day that we're paying the most attention to? And I think, Aaron, a lot of us talked about, basically software as a service. So, so move your stuff off prem, get it into a data center. We just had a situation, I live outside of Louisville, Kentucky, where there's a town, a county in Louisville that does not want data centers. Huh. So where are you building data centers? Because a lot of these towns are saying, we don't want that here. It takes too much energy off the grid. It's noisy, all of the things. It's another big concrete thing that looks like a warehouse. We don't want it here. Yeah. So there's a lot of complexity in that space. It's not so easy to just build another data center.
No, it's not. Yeah.
But what if that thing will be in the cloud? How people will see that part?
Well, and which cloud, Alex? Because
that's another problem.
We're even going into competing. We've got, you could have one company that's storing stuff in different clouds, because you got to have some redundancy too, right?
True. Yeah, I agree on that.
What if one goes down? You got to be able to access it someplace else. So the more you build on to try and make it easier to access or more assured access, the more risk you take on.
Correct.
And the more vulnerabilities you create, because it's one more place where it could be accessed.
Even with the cloud, people are saying that it's more, let's say, not permissive, but safe. Let's say safe, but it's not so safe, because everywhere where if you have hybrid cloud, if you have on-prem, doesn't matter. Everywhere there's a risk, a risk that can be done by your personal or by someone who's controlling that cloud in terms of access. Because I have seen people that they forgot to remove the accounts into the cloud. And guess what? After that person left the company, he could access the cloud. It's unbelievable.
Well, I think the reality of it is, the idea was, I don't have to spend more money on servers.
Yeah.
And so there was a cost savings by moving it to a shared space. But you're saving money over here, but you're not removing the risk from you. You're actually taking on shared risk that you might not understand 100% if you're not in really good communication with the provider, and you really don't understand what they're doing.
Do you think it comes down to a cost savings issue, or is there no really cost savings to move to the cloud?
Well, that's a really good question.
I can answer.
Yeah.
On the cloud side, it's a cost saving, to be honest. But it comes other type of cost when you want to do the implementation, and then that's a problem.
Yeah.
On the other side, on-prem is different. You have the people on site, your own people, in fact, on site, and they know very well how to implement. But again, it might come with some cost over there. Mm-hmm. So it depends how you see that.
Yeah. Well, I think it also depends on what your business is. Is your business data storage, or is your business what your business is? Because I think the growth of data can actually overtake you in a way that makes you a data storage company, and you're spending all your money protecting your data versus doing the business that you say you're in. And so I think you got to make that decision.
Yeah.
Because otherwise you're creating more servers or buying more servers and creating more space to store. Yeah. But is your business data storage and protection?
Yes.
Because it comes at a cost.
Yeah.
And that's a business conversation.
So one other question, how do we prioritize threats and vulnerabilities in environments that have overlapping tools, vendors, processes? How do we do that?
May I answer? I know it's my favorite.
Yeah, question. Absolutely. Have at it, Alex.
Okay. We know that vulnerabilities are based on the CVSS score. So that's one of the things. So they have vectors. Based on that vectors, we can identify if it's based on the confidentiality, integrity, and traceability. We have also the risk-based approach, and that is based on something. What that means, something, it's exploitability, for example, or asset criticality, or a business impact, or exposure level. That's another thing. And people ask, okay, what means exposure level? That means internet facing, for example, or privileged access. This is one of the examples on the exposure level. So where your asset it's put it. It's in the internet or not. It has an access, what type of access, and so on. Then we have threat intel over there, and over there is more about active exploitability or active exploitation. And then the last part, the last part, I could say, security tool telemetry correlation. That's another important thing. So we have multiple factors that is based on the vulnerabilities. Now, how we prioritize those? So we talked a bit about the vulnerabilities. How we prioritize those? We have to understand where that risk is located. Is on our application. Okay, we try to understand what type of application it is. We try to understand what type of database is involved over there. We're trying to understand what type of other technologies we have there. So another thing very important, and people might say, okay, but my application uses only .NET. Yeah, but .NET doesn't use only .NET. May use other technologies as well, because it depends on what is based on your application. Maybe that application is from a banking, or maybe that application is from healthcare. Let's say in hospitals are multiple applications used for different type of medical devices and so on. I mean, everything is different. Every technology is different, and that technology might be interconnected with different other technologies or databases or whatever is there. So we have multiple things. If we discover all these things, we might reduce the risk as much as we can. But people are saying, my colleagues did a pen test, everything went fine, but in the end it wasn't and fine. Why? Because people say, okay, I'll take care of the high, but not about the medium vulnerabilities. All the time, medium vulnerabilities, or even those with low, might become the high ones. So don't forget about this. People are saying, okay, but I have seen a high one reduced to low after 3 or 5 years by, let's say, Microsoft is an example. And then after 10 years, I discovered that is a 0-day. And people doesn't pay attention on this. For example, I'm doing something. I'm working on something on a report to understand the history of a vulnerability. What that means? It means you take a vulnerability from 10 or 20 years ago from a specific vendor, let's say Microsoft or even Fortinet, and then you try to see the history of it. How was, let's say, fixed or not? If reappear, what was the cause and how can be protected from that specific vulnerability? So this is why I said is a topic that I like it and I know how to deal it. Maybe I'm talking too much on this, but of course. There is one thing that people has to understand, and most used vulnerability scanners that are used for the vulnerabilities is Tenable, Nessus, and Qualys. That's another thing. And over there are two different things that he's doing. Nessus is doing part of the internal scanning of the infrastructure. Qualys is giving with something more. And over there, I'm speaking about WAF, which is Web Application Firewall, and is trying to find on your application level what are the risks. So this is in a nutshell about this topic. I will give you back the floor to Bonnie.
No, and I was going to say,
obviously we've hit a note.
Go ahead, Bonnie. I'm sorry.
Yeah. So I think the other piece of it though is is making sure that we understand what we're prioritizing.
Yeah.
And so a lot of times we prioritize based on who came in the door last.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so because everybody's got something they're selling, and I think it's making sure that you've got vendors you trust, and that you've got people in there that are really racking and stacking. What are the things that we need to be paying attention to? So much of this, I think, is based on really budget. So if I'm having to prioritize my budget, I might decide, you know what, I've got this capability in place. It really hasn't netted me anything lately, and so I can let it go.
Yeah.
So that I can buy something else. And the reality of it is it, do I have something else that does that same thing? Or am I creating another vulnerability when I let it go?
For sure, we'll be creating a new vulnerability.
Absolutely. So you can't keep everything.
Yeah.
But, is what you're keeping still, is what you're keeping worth keeping? And is what you're adding going to, could it eliminate a tool that you've got in place or capability because it incorporates that into the new tool? I think it's the bigger piece of it is making sure that it's not just overlapping. It actually has something new to add, because redundancy is great, except if it's doing the same job. Is it bringing something new and doing something that's already being done, as opposed to just bringing something new? Because otherwise, in the land of infinite, I have not seen that in the cyber budget world, where, just here's some more money, do some more. It typically is you got to rack and stack, because we've all, and explain to me the risk of not doing.
I thought cyber had unlimited budgets.
Yeah.
I don't think so.
No, that's not true.
No.
I wish that was the case. I have not seen that. I have not seen that to be the case, however, Aaron. So I mean, most of the time it's taking a look at what you've got and deciding what's the most essential pieces here.
Yeah, that's correct.
One of the things that I'm finding in this space in my conversations with a lot of CISOs is that access management and visibility are both big concerns right now. And so, so this access management piece is huge because there's a lot going on in that space. But also visibility of the system. And so, so what are the capabilities that are the most likely to help you with visibility and access management seem to be the priorities right now?
Yeah, I spent time in the OT space, and boy, talk about a different animal there.
Yeah.
Your priorities are obviously going to be your DCSs, your control systems, your PLCs, and then, managing them with operating systems that could be 10, 15 years old and equipment that's could be 10, 20 years old. And so each environment you learn from the enterprise to the OT, so unique, so different. So each one prioritizing is so different to them. It can be very confusing for people.
You know what's the difference between the vulnerabilities that we have nowadays on let's say infrastructure that we have day by day against the infrastructure in IoT? The big difference over there, a vulnerability can, for most of us in the corporate, let's say, or banking or whatever, can be fixed. But in an IoT, it is based on let's say, on the profile. What that means, profile. Let's say we are speaking about railways. Over there, a vulnerability can be fixed in 5 years. Can't be fixed whenever you can do it. And this discussion have been done with the manager who is from the division of Fortinet on the IoT. He told me about this. I knew somehow from other person who was in the IoT part, and they were somehow discussing that for the nuclear, let's say we have a nuclear plant, for those kind of things, the vulnerabilities can be fixed after 7 to 10 years. You can't do the patching for the 7 years or even 10 years because you have over there a PLC, and that can be patched whenever you can, whenever it needs, and so on.
Yeah, because at those points in those places, we used to work with refineries. It's all about safety, right?
Yeah,
so
correct.
You're not thinking of cybersecurity at that point. You're thinking about safety, and especially in a nuclear power plant, you can imagine. So these systems, you're right, they're 10, 15 years old, and to patch them, you got to shut them down.
Exactly.
So,
and you can't.
You really can't. Yeah, or I don't know how they do it at this point, but it's very difficult. Let me see. We have Michael here. Actually, does a quick comment here. I like this. Cybersecurity is a function of risk management. Budget is driven by risk mitigation costs. The principle of diminishing returns also applies. Cost of recovery versus cost to protect. Thank you, Michael.
Yeah,
I agree.
and Michael, I think that is a great point. We were having a conversation earlier today, and I said, about where we've seen it not work out really well. As I said, I'm right outside of Louisville, Kentucky. The health system that I participate in for health care was breached 2 years ago, and the first thing that happened is the CEO went and did a YouTube video to his workforce, which was unfortunate. But the reality of it was over the period of time that this thing unraveled, it just got worse and worse. And, I said, I'd come home and say to my husband, I feel like I'm doing basically group therapy with my providers right now, because they're all so stressed out about what's going on in this space. And the lack of communication was not making them feel better. It just was making it worse. And so,
Yeah.
so what's the right amount? I don't know. I mean, I think the organization has to decide, what is there a monetary risk to not doing it right? Because right now there's multiple class action suits going on. I mean,
Yeah.
and they will only grow as people get EOBs from their healthcare providers that are their insurers that say there's this billing out there for you that we don't understand, and neither do you. And all of the other pieces about having your data out there on the dark web with all of your insurance data. So there's a lot
Yes,
going
I
on
had
in this
mentioned
space.
that extensive sold on dark web. Yeah.
Absolutely. So the bigger piece of it is, how do you balance the reputational risk, the real cost of it, because there is going to be a price to pay, and then the cost of securing your systems in a way that that gets you the most bang for your buck. Because I think that's where everybody's kind of stuck in this moment, is like, how do I get the most bang for my buck without spending everything I've got on something that can't be 100% secure?
Yeah. So let's go to another question here. What are some common blind spots that often go unnoticed, even in mature organizations?
So I mean, I'm going to date myself a little bit here, but I mean, I started off with Atari's hardware, team back in the old days when Atari was most known for their video games, and as
Yeah.
the Atari Amigo never really went anyplace. But what I watched was, even in the hardware side, where they weren't talking to each other, so they they came out with this thing that didn't work initially, because the keyboard wouldn't work with the with the CPU, wouldn't work with the the video display terminal. So I mean, it was kind of clunky. But I think the bigger piece of it is, I think we only pay attention to the thing that is at the top of our list right now. And so we don't think of the whole. My endpoint starts at one point and ends at another point, but that's just my end to end. I don't think of the whole of the end to end of what I'm doing here. And
Yeah,
so,
but we might have a lack of encryption by default over there.
absolutely. And I mean, it is a lack of inclusion by default, because do we want people to really know? Or have we created silos so that we can survive in this space? Alex, what's your thought on that?
Yeah, and even though I think it's not okay. I mean, I have seen even a part of the modern authentication protocols. Those might not support SSO or even MFA. Guess what? Or even the standard logging, it's not in place, or even the telemetry. Sometimes even the telemetry doesn't work at all. I mean, I have seen companies where you want to identify where the laptop or mobile device, like a cell phone or even a tablet, where is located, doesn't work. Or if it's working, it's not providing the correct address. That's another problem that I have seen. Even we have seen it on the, let's say, if we talk about the DevOps, we see over there the developers have a problem with the API, where the API is exposing the entire data, which is not okay.
Yeah.
So I don't know what to say. These gaps create islands of risk, to be honest.
Well, and you don't find about it until you find out about it. So I mean, I would say absolutely. So there's devices out there that people don't know they've been lost, or they've been in the supply chain so long with respect to they haven't been tracked.
Yeah.
But how often do you see mature organizations where you've got the CIO sitting over here, and over in engineering they've built what I call the secret system to do the secret work that they don't tell the CIO about?
Not so many.
I mean, Not so many, Alex.
No. It depends. I mean, the developers.
Not where I work. No.
And now we're starting to talk about what really goes on. Yeah, I mean, that's the mature organization piece, because you get the CIO people that migrate over to engineering and they've got a good idea, but CIO won't allow them to do it. So engineering's got funds.
Yeah,
I mean,
correct.
and the reality of it is they build that system to do that specific job, but it creates risk for the entire organizational system that CIO doesn't know about.
But was the thing and difference over them. CIOs, let's say, knows 80 or 60%. That's the only problem. This is why I have mentioned before. And it comes with a problem. Why? Because sometimes CIO is busy with some work, let's say, for that specific day, and he is not informing the CISO. And then the CISO identifies, because he has good guys inside of his team, and it identifies problems like API that I have mentioned.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, like I said, I can remember looking at a company one time and finding out about it and thinking like, well, I figured out what your insider risk looks like right now. I mean, this was the biggest threat to everything, is that they had that super secret, like, special system going on.
Yeah.
That was outside of everything else, but was creating incredible risk to the entire organization. So I think, even mature organizations, they're just, the good idea guys, all well-intentioned. It's all well-intentioned, but there is no understanding of the risk that's created when you do some of these things. And so, how do you create a culture where people, back to the fact that you tell me no doesn't make my requirement go away. The communication piece of, here's why this isn't possible this way, but if we did it this way, we could probably make it work. And I think that next level of conversation has to occur. And so many times it does not. And so you tell me no, so I go away and I figure out how to do it.
Yeah.
Because I'll get somebody else to help me. And because I still have a job I need to get done.
Yeah. So to both of you, our current detection capabilities, are they keeping pace with the new attacks? Obviously, every single time we have these LinkedIn Live, everyone's talking about AI-powered attacks, supply chain compromises. Are these new tools, are these new detection, are they, because it's moving so fast, are they keeping pace?
They are monitored, let's say like that. But, with the new techniques, because that's the main problem over there. With the new techniques, things evolved. And when it evolves too much, it's hard to monitor them. I have seen very often these kind of things where we saw cyber attacks where things were done by AI, and it's bypassing different mechanisms that we have put in place. And it's not your fault that mechanism can't be detected, that type of cyber attack, because it's a new technique. Every new technique, it's not known. It's used as a new one, and this is what maybe the threat actors wants. I mean, to have all the time new techniques in order to not be discovered.
Well, I mean, it certainly keeps the antivirus community in business. So, but the other piece of it is, I think, Aaron, the simple answer is yeah. I mean, we're not keeping up because they've got all the time and the resources to spend, because money's at the end of it typically.
Yeah, I agree.
And so, we've got finite resources and time to spend trying to secure the systems, and you're only as good as today. Because it's the whole idea is one time that you get breached defines your entire history. It doesn't matter how many of them you repel. It's the one time they get through that the risk, the reputation, the cost, all of those things become very apparent. And so I think you have to be really mindful of that in this space. Is there a 100% solution? No, not unless you want to grow elderly and die at your desk. I mean, there is no 100%. You can only be as good as you can be, but you can't let down your guard either. And so, I guess that's my pep talk. Include the other people in your, in helping you manage the risk. Don't think you have to do it alone.
So I did have a question here. I'll post it up by this user. With the economic, political landscape changing, what issue risk do you foresee happening? Volunteer, cyber terrorism, who is at more risk, and what actions can be put in place? Without a huge cost. That's not in there, but yeah.
One of the questions I ask companies a lot is, basically, who's your biggest threat?
That's a good question.
Yeah, I know, because,
Yeah.
because what you'll get is like, well, so you'll get a global company who's doing something that's, infrastructure based, and they'll say, well, it's that guy down the street. And I'll say, well, what about China?
Yeah.
I get that kind of like, well, what about China? Well, China might like to have this technology too. Or, or what about Russia? I think the bigger piece of it is you've got to be a little bit more thoughtful about really who is your biggest threat. And, and what is the thing that you're trying to protect the most? Are you trying to protect people? Are you protecting things? Are you protecting data? What are you protecting the most? Because if you're not paying attention to it, you're going to spend a lot of money on something that doesn't matter.
Correct.
And, and they're still going to get you. So really it comes back down to, really analyzing the risk from a holistic point of view. What is my risk? What do I really do here that I need to protect the most? And then who are all of the threats that are out there? Obviously the criminals are out there, so much of this is criminal, but would I also be somebody that a state actor would be wanting to come after? Because a state actor is really, if they want you, they're going to be really, really hard on to get you. And some of the criminals
have the
there's money
resources and money to do it.
Of course.
And you think of any of the defense industrial base we have in the United States.
Absolutely.
Talk about a perfect target for that.
That's exactly
well, they know that though, but yeah.
And so, and even if it's not just you, what other part of your company is involved in something that somebody might be interested in? Because they might use you to swim upstream to that next place.
Yeah.
So you're not just responsible for what you're protecting, in your little corner of the world. It might be that you're responsible for a bigger piece of what's going on.
Yeah.
And I think that's the piece that's got to be looked at. Stop, looking down and really look up and around and make a very realistic, I was teasing my son now, who's 28, the other day. When he was 19, I said to him, has anybody been trying to like ask you questions about me online or anything? And, and with all of the honesty of like a young man, he looked at me and he said, who would care about you? It's like, and I took it right to the heart, I was like, oh, and so, and I looked at him and I said, Chris, you're right. Bonnie Smith, probably not so much, but the director of the Center for Cyber Intelligence might be of better, of greater interest.
Yeah.
And and it was like that moment when he looked at me and he went like, oh my gosh, Mom, I didn't even think about that.
Yeah.
Okay. I just think of Bonnie Smith.
Well, he looked at you from a mom standpoint and then from a totally different.
Yeah. And I think that's the piece that a lot of us get caught in. Like, nobody cares about what I'm doing here. Maybe step back and take a look at it and say, who would care about what I'm doing here?
Exactly.
And what I have access to and the other places they could get from me. And I think that's the bigger piece of it, Aaron, that a lot of people don't pay attention to.
Yeah, correct.
Because you share a bigger risk than what you think you share. And you're part of it. You're part of the solution.
Yeah. So we are at actually 2:58. We're almost done. I'll leave it open just for a minute. So if anybody has any other questions that they want to post on here. But one last question I'll solve out. I'll throw out is, does tool sprawl contribute more to security gaps than it solves?
Alex, you want to, like I said, you're in the middle of that. I think
so often, yes. Just this is the short answer. Because tool sprawl introduces fragmented visibility. What that means, it means each tool sees a partial picture, let's say. You have data silos over there, which means inconsistent correlation and analytics, redundant alerts. So everything is causing analyst fatigue, because you are looking on 100 things and then you don't understand from the logs anything. You have high operational costs where too many integrations, let's say, or too much trainings, maintenance, and so on, which is again another problem. And then complex response orchestration. If those tools don't communicate well, then you're SOAR workflows break, and again, you have another problem. So in a nutshell, about all of these, tools pro is usually the result of short-term fixes or overlapping purchases across teams. You have multiple things that you integrate in each team, and then you have too many things. What should I take it? Well, should I take care of that, or which one of them? And then a platform for first approach, and this can be, I don't know, consolidating vendors or integration via open standards like API, for example, is often more effective in the long run. So we have to think very well what we would like to put over there.
So we do have one last. I know we're right over at 3 o'clock, but I'm going to show this. If you guys want to cover this real fast.
Yeah, Michael, I was, you know, I'll tell you, I was thinking about your question and or your comment. I don't know about you, but you know, Target is kind of my $100 store, and so there was a while there when I didn't go to Target without cash, and so my shopping kind of diminished considerably. I think the reality of it is we've become a little bit numb to the whole idea of cyber breaches. I mean, how often in the mail do you get something from some company saying, you know, our data was breached, we're enrolling you in free, you know, basically identity theft, you know, kind of program, and you know, and then you can pay to renew it after a year. I think the visibility piece is huge. I mean, if you remember when Equifax got breached, I mean, my brother pointed out to me this weird kind of upside down world in that we actually were going to start paying Equifax to do the thing that Equifax was supposed to be doing without us paying them. You know, go figure on that. And that was protecting our identities. So I think we've become inured to it to some degree. It doesn't make the news like it used to unless there's an infrastructure piece to it, or some sort of a state actor background. We've just accepted that cyber criminals are out there all the time. Yeah. You know, I mean, how often do you get calls from the FBI, the IRS, your bank, you know, like Medicare, somebody trying to get your information or something. So I think we've become numb to it to some degree.
Yeah, I agree.
That we just accept that, you know, I said, you know, I don't typically use my debit card at a gas station by a major brand because we've been skimmed twice there.
Yeah.
And so there's certain places that I won't use a card to buy certain things. I think
you're dead on. I think for friends and family that I know, they've become numb to it. They've become so used to it.
Yeah.
From the letters and everything else. And, you know, we teach very simple things of don't use your debit card anywhere. Use a credit card, have some, you know, it's like dual authentication. Make sure you have several layers protecting you from yourself and your direct bank account.
I didn't say, you know, when's the last time you let one of your kids or somebody else use your phone? I mean, you know, I watch people let their kids have their phones. I mean, my grandchildren and my children know that they don't use my phone.
Yeah.
I mean, that's all there is to it. So because it authenticates me. Actually, the phone authenticates itself, but because it's mine, it authenticates me. And so the reality of it is, I mean, you know, this phone represents a certain amount of identity for me. So I'm not handing it over to children who want to play games online. So I think that's a big piece of it is how responsible are you for managing your own safety in this space? It's tough.
Yes.
If it wasn't, we wouldn't be talking about it.
Yeah. Michael, you're right. APTs get all the press. Cybercrime is whatever.
That's exactly right. Amen to that. That's exactly right.
Great.
Well, guys, we are definitely over. It's 3:03. I would like to thank everyone for their time joining us. Bonnie, thank you so much. Alex, like always, thank you so much.
You're welcome. Anytime.
And everyone, thank you so much for joining us. Okay.